The crowd parted like water before a blade. Commander Valerie of the Huntress Corps didn't slow her stride as she moved through the diplomatic corridor of Citadel Orin, her obsidian armor catching the pale light of a dozen hanging luminaries. Behind her, 3 junior huntresses kept perfect formation. Ahead, the human delegation waited in the antechamber, 12 figures in plain grey uniforms, standing with the kind of stillness that made her mandibles itch. Humans. She had heard the reports. Read the assessments. Dismissed most of both. They were small. Soft-bodied. Their homeworld was catastrophically hostile by galactic standards. Tectonic violence, atmospheric extremes, predators that should have rendered them extinct 10,000 years ago. And, yet here they stood, having clawed their way to the stars through sheer, ugly persistence. The Conclave of 7 had reluctantly granted them observer status 3 years prior. Now they wanted something more. Queen Sathra had agreed to meet them. Valerie didn't understand why, but she didn't need to. Her job was to protect the Queen, not advise her. She passed through the antechamber without acknowledging the humans. Protocol demanded it. No eye contact, no greeting, no gesture that might be interpreted as opening diplomatic dialogue before the Queen's formal arrival. The humans seemed to understand this. They watched her pass with those flat, forward-facing eyes, and said nothing. One of them, she noticed, was a child. She stopped. The child stood at the far edge of the delegation, slightly apart from the adults, dressed in the same grey uniform but, wearing it the way children wear formal clothes, uncomfortably, with one collar button undone and a sleeve pushed up to the elbow. It was small even by human standards. Perhaps 8 or 9 of their years. It was looking at Valerie with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. Not fear. Not awe. Something more careful than either. She turned her head and found the senior human diplomat, a woman with silver-streaked hair named Ambassador Chen, according to the briefing files. Valerie's gaze communicated the question without words. Why is there a child here? Ambassador Chen's expression shifted into something careful and apologetic. She said something quietly in galactic standard about an unforeseen family circumstance, a last-minute change, assurances that the child would remain silent and unobtrusive. Valerie looked at the child again. It looked back at her with those careful, measuring eyes, and she felt something she hadn't felt in years of standing at the Queen's side. Unease. She completed her circuit of the room, confirmed the security arrangements, and posted her huntresses. The ceremony would begin in 12 minutes. The Queen would enter through the northern arch, take her elevated seat, and receive the human petition under the terms of the Veil Accords. It would take perhaps 40 minutes. Then, the humans would leave, the conclave would deliberate, and Valerie's life would return to its normal, manageable shape. She positioned herself at the Queen's left shoulder, 3 steps back, 1 step elevated on the dais approach. Her armor registered ambient temperature, atmospheric composition, the heartbeats of every living being in the room. 37 signals. The child's heartbeat was slower than she expected, calmer than the adults around it. That, too, made her uneasy. Queen Sathra entered precisely on time. She was everything the conclave needed her to be in this moment. Tall, draped in ceremonial gold and deep violet, her crest raised to full formal height. She moved without hurry and without hesitation, and the room responded the way rooms always responded to her, with a collective stillness, a held breath, a moment where every being present felt the weight of what they stood before. The humans bowed in their fashion, heads inclined, hands clasped. Ambassador Chen spoke the formal greeting in careful, well-rehearsed Orin dialect. The Queen received it with a slight incline of her own head and took her seat. The petition began. Valerie let it become background noise. Diplomacy was not her domain. She watched the room instead, every face, every hand, every subtle shift of weight that might signal intent. The junior huntresses mirrored her attention from their positions at the chamber's 4 compass points. Nothing moved without her knowing it. She watched the child. It had been placed near the back of the delegation, partially behind 2 of the taller adults, visible to Valerie only because of her elevated position. It was well behaved. It stood still. Its heartbeat remained even. But its eyes kept moving to the Queen's throne with an intensity that was not wonder, not curiosity, and not the ordinary fascination of a child encountering something magnificent for the first time. It was studying the room, cataloguing it, the way Valerie herself had done when she was a young recruit learning to read a space before she could secure it. Who, she thought, teaches a child to look at a room like that? 20 minutes into the petition, the child moved. It was barely a movement at all, a slight shift of weight, a half step to the left that brought it out from behind the adults, into a marginally clearer line of sight to the throne. No one around it reacted. To the rest of the room, it had simply fidgeted, the way children do when made to stand still too long. Valor's hand moved to the grip of her sidearm before she had consciously decided to move it. She made herself stop. She made herself assess. The child was across the chamber, unarmed by every reading her armor could take, in a room that had been swept 3 times by her team and twice by Conclave security. There was no threat here. There was no reason for her hand to be where it was. She removed it. The child's eyes moved from the throne to Valere, and it gave her a very small, very deliberate nod, the kind of nod that said, "I saw that. I understand. We are the same kind of person, you and I." Her blood ran cold. She did not move. She did not reach for her weapon again. She stood at perfect attention and watched the child with everything she had, and the petition continued, and the Queen spoke her measured replies, and 37 heartbeats moved through the room, and nothing happened. For another 12 minutes, nothing happened at all. Then, the assassin made her move. She came from the ceiling, a huntress, Vo realized with a lurch of horror, one of her own, someone who had passed every check and worn her armor and stood her post and waited. She dropped from the shadow of the upper gallery with a pulse blade already extended, angled for the Queen's throat in a trajectory that had been calculated, that was clean, that would reach its target in less than 1 second. Valere was already moving. She was fast. She was the fastest huntress in the Corps, had been for 11 years, had trained every day of those 11 years to be faster still. She was not going to make it. She knew this in the first half second. The geometry was wrong. The angle was wrong. The assassin had chosen the drop point with precision that meant she had watched this room the way Vora watched rooms, had counted distances, measured response times, and determined exactly where the commander would be standing and exactly how many fractions of a second she would fall short. This had been planned by someone who knew her. The child hit the assassin first. Not a tackle. Not a grab. Something faster and, stranger than either, a single open palm strike to the back of the assassin's right knee as she descended, delivered with a timing so precise it could only have come from someone who had tracked every millisecond of the drop and known exactly where to be and exactly when to be there. The contact was light. A touch, almost. A brush of a small human hand against obsidian armor. The armor shattered. Not cracked. Not compromised. Shattered. The entire right side panel detonating outward in a cascade of fragmented obsidian composite that pinged off the walls and floor like thrown gravel. The assassin's descent became a tumble. The pulse blade swung wide. She hit the dais steps hard and rolled, and, by the time she stopped moving, Volo's weapon was at her throat and her 3 junior huntresses had converged from their posts with the mechanical precision of a closing trap. Silence. Queen Sathra had not moved. She sat on her throne with her hands folded in her lap and regarded the scene before her with an expression that Vole, in 20 years of service, had never seen on her face. The child stood near the dais steps, its sleeve still pushed up to the elbow, its collar button still undone. It was breathing slightly harder than before. Otherwise, it looked as it had when Voa first saw it, careful, measuring, somewhere beyond calm. Ambassador Chen had gone the color of ash. One of the other human delegates, a broad-shouldered man near the back, had moved during the chaos into a position that, Voa now realized, would have given him clean interception angles on the 2 chamber exits. He had not drawn a weapon. He had simply moved, and now stood there as though he had always been standing there, and his face said nothing at all. Valere secured the assassin's wrists with restraint cable and stood. Her hand was steady. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was steadier. "The chamber is secure," she said. Standard post-incident protocol. The word she had said 100 times in training and hoped never to say in the throne room itself. She turned to face the Queen. Sathra's eyes moved from the restrained assassin to the child, to the shattered armor fragments still scattered across the dais steps. Then, back to the child. Her crest, which had risen sharply at the moment of attack, slowly, deliberately lowered to half-mast, not distress, but consideration. The gesture of a mind working. "Child," the Queen said. The word carried in the silence the way only the Queen's voice could carry, without volume, without force, landing in the chest like something placed there rather than thrown. The child looked up. What did you strike? A pause. Then, the harmonic node. Every plate in that armor pattern has one. It's a design vulnerability. The composite material resonates at a specific frequency when stress is applied to the node in lateral motion. Strike it correctly and the resonance cascades. The child's voice was higher than an adult's but carried the same matter-of-fact quality as someone reciting something they had learned before they learned to doubt. I read the technical assessment of your core armor specifications in the Conclave Public Archive. The file was 6 years old but the design hasn't changed. No one in the room spoke. You read our armor specifications, Valere said. I read everything, the child said, without apology and without pride. Just information. Valere looked at Ambassador Chen. The ambassador looked like someone trying to decide how much honesty the moment required. She settled on all of it. Myra she has certain aptitudes. We try to direct them constructively.
Konstruktively, var lirarrepatet.
She asked to accompany the delegation because she wanted to see how Orin security protocols differed from published documentation. A pause. She does this. She goes places and she reads the room. Val looked at the child, at Myra, and thought about the half-step to the left, the measuring eyes, the nod that said we are the same kind of person. She thought about the fact that this child had read a 6-year-old technical document and retained not just its contents but its tactical applications and had then positioned herself in a live security environment to act on that retention with a timing precise enough to save the Queen's life. She thought about who teaches a child to look at a room like that. Maybe no one had to. Bring the restraints, she said to her junior huntresses, nodding at the assassin. Full processing. I want identity confirmation before anyone speaks to her. She turned back to the Queen, awaited the signal to clear the chamber. Sathra held up one hand. The signal for hold. She was still looking at Myra. You were afraid, the Queen said. Not a question. Myra considered it. Yes. But you moved anyway. The window was 0.4 seconds, the child said. There wasn't time to be afraid first. Another silence. Ver felt the room recalibrate around those words, felt her huntresses absorbing them, turning them over, recognizing something in them that resonated with every hour of training they had ever endured. There wasn't time to be afraid first. The entire philosophy of the Huntress Corps collapsed into a single child sentence. The Queen's crest rose, slowly, to full formal height. It was not the height of ceremony. It was the height of acknowledgement, the crest position that Orin nobility reserved for peers. Ambassador Chen, Queen Sathra said, her eyes still on the child. I believe we were in the middle of your petition. Chen blinked. Yes. Yes, Your Majesty. I find myself more favorably disposed toward the human request than I was 30 minutes ago. The Queen finally looked away from Myra and settled her gaze on Chen with the full weight of a ruler who has made a decision. We will discuss terms. Valere resumed her position at the Queen's left shoulder. She kept one eye on the restrained assassin. She kept the other on the room, on the broad-shouldered man near the exit who had moved so quietly, on the human delegates who had watched a child save a queen and shown no surprise, only quiet, focused relief. She had a great deal of thinking to do about the human delegation. But, later, Myra had drifted back to the edge of the group. She stood with her collar button undone and her sleeve pushed up and her breathing back to its baseline calm, and if Ver had not been watching she would have looked like nothing more than a child waiting for the adults to finish talking. But Valere was watching. And Myra was already watching back, eyes moving through the room again, cataloguing, measuring, reading every angle with that quiet, patient attention that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with nature. Valere made a decision of her own. When this was over, when the assassin was processed and the petition was concluded and the room had been swept again and the reports had been filed, she was going to find out exactly how many technical documents in the Conclave Public Archive contained Orin security specifications. And then, she was going to find out how many of them Myra had read. She suspected the answer was all of them. She suspected that was going to change a great many things. She stood at the Queen's shoulder, armor perfect, posture straight, weapon at her side, and watched a human child watch the room, and, for the first time in 11 years as the fastest huntress in the Corps, Bora allowed herself to feel something she almost never felt. Glad that someone was on her side. The petition concluded 40 minutes later. Terms were agreed upon. The human delegation bowed in their fashion, heads inclined, hands clasped, and withdrew in good order through the northern corridor. Myra was the last one through the door. At the threshold, she paused and, looked back, found Valor's eyes across the length of the chamber with the ease of someone who had known exactly where she was standing the entire time. She gave her the same small, deliberate nod. Valera returned it. The door closed. The room breathed.